Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to part 7 of week 2 for NodeJS course at Hack Your Future. Now, we've taken a lot of time here to build up a lot of knowledge about REST, about HTTP, about CRUD operations, web APIs, and about Postman. And now we're all going to bring that all together in this example where we're going to build a library API for managing books uh, in our library. So real quick, I'm looking for the table here. So this is the kind of operations that we need. We need 4 operations: get, create, update, and delete a specific book. And we need to make sure we are using the right methods. We have the right body, we have the right response, and all of this we need to make sure that everything is working correctly. So please, yeah, I would like to do this together. So open open a new folder, create a new folder somewhere, open it in Visual Studio Code or whatever editor you would like to use, and let's code together this application. So the first thing that we do when we start a new Node application, always we initialize init. So npm, we initialize npm, sorry, not init, npm init minus minus yes. Then we're going to use Express to build the web server, so we need to install Express. Oh, sorry, my mistake. npm install Express. Now this will take some time. Now we're going to create our main file, which we're going to call server.js. Okay. Now I'm going to grab again as starter the code for an Express app, just to have something to start with. So this is the code that I'm copying from npm.js express package. I'm just going to copy that to start with some code so that I don't start from scratch. Okay. Now, what do we need to do? So let me first write down all the different operations that we had. So we had read, right, which is get operation, and the URL was, or the path was books, right? Then we had create, which was post, and the URL was also books. And this was the exercise from the previous part, so I hope everybody has this already. I'm just going to write them here for clarity. Then we have update, and we're going to use put books, and here is the ID. And then finally we have delete, which is also delete, and this is the same path that we need to have. Okay, now notice how these things are basically the same things that we need to write down in our request handlers. So to get the book, we need to say books, and again this is the so when we're writing with Express, app.get get corresponds to the request method. So this request handler will only handle get requests that arrive with this path. Yeah? This is something I didn't cover last week because we haven't learned yet about requests and paths, but keep in mind that get is used corresponds to the request method, and this request handler will only handle requests that have the method that's put in here and the path that's put in as the first parameter. Okay, so now if I write it like this, get books should call a function which creates a book. Oh, sorry, what am I talking about? Read books. Okay, I'm not going to now go into details how this read books will work, but that's what we need to do, right? We need have a operation, we have a get request, then we need to read the books. I'm just going to copy this because I'm lazy. I'm going to paste it 4 times, and then I'm going to start changing it. So then we have post, and then the URL stays the same, and the operation is create book. Then we have put books, and now we use ID, and Express understands this kind of syntax, that this is actually not the literal URL, but this is actually a parameter that will be replaced by the actual ID. So this is a syntax that Express understands. And then this would be update book. Again, when we are reading books, so multiple. When we are creating, it's always one. Updating is also always one. And deleting usually is also one book. So then we have delete. And this is also with the ID. And then this is delete book. So this is the basic setup that we have. Now we have declared our routes or endpoints of the API, and we have defined that for which URL, what kind of request will be handled by which request handler. So when a request comes in at the path books and with the method get, then the function read books will be called. If a request comes in with the method post at the same URL, then the function create book will be called, and so forth. And now notice I have not written down what exactly these functions do. We're going to do that now. But already this gives us the structure how we can work with the API. So we have already in our head the basic structure for all the endpoints. Okay, now let's start writing out these functions. So I think the easiest one would be to write the read. Now, in a real world, the data about the books would be stored in a database, but we have not yet learned about databases. Just for the sake of the example, we are going to store the books in a file. I'm just going to make a file which is called books.json, for example, and I'm going to put in here 2 books that I have. Now you can put in any books that you want. It doesn't matter as long as they have an ID, title, and an author. It doesn't matter. So I've used JSON, JavaScript object notation. So it's basically an array of objects where the object has keys and values, and the key has to be ID, title, and author, and the values can be whatever you want. So this is the data that we're going to work with for our example. Now, to read the data in from this file, I'm going to show you a nice little trick. Now, this is what, as I said, it's a trick. So don't use this. We will not use this in real life applications because then we'll have a database. But for now, it's convenient to use the require notation to import data from a file. So basically, this will give us all the books that we have in this file, and we'll put them in this object. So if I now do a console log data, you will see that I have all these books in here. Okay, so already we have something, and I think we can already run this. Let's see if this runs. Node server. Yeah. So you see the 2 books that we have in the file are being logged to the console here. Now the app is running and it's actually going to handle any request that comes in, but we have not defined this function. So when a request comes in, the request handler will actually throw an error, and we can check that real quick. So if I try to read books now, yeah, you see it throws an error, 500 internal error. This is all handled by Express. So Express can detect when there is an error, and it knows to send a 500 response. And the error is actually what you get. Also, we get that in the console in here. It says read books is not defined. So we need to define this function read books to be able to get the data. And the data in our case is stored in this variable. So all we need to do in this read books function is to put this data and send it back as a response. So let's do that. So this is the simplest function, and I'm just going to go ahead and write it. Read books. We're passing the request and the response because we need to send back to the response the data. For reading, we don't need the request for anything, but in the other operations we need it. We pass it just in case we in the future decide that we need to use it. I'm just going to say send, and then I'm going to say data, basically, because data is the object where we have our books. I'm gonna get rid of this console log there. So now I'm sending the data back, and there is only one other thing that I need to add. If you remember, I repeated this many times. Yeah, so that is the content type, right? So I need to set a header called content type. Now, how do you set a header in Express? Well, you can Google, of course, how to set content type in the response. I'll show you. So there is a function called set header. Yeah, exactly as you would expect. And here already I have some recommendation. The first value is the key, which is content type, or the name of the header. And then the value is, in our case, it's JSON, so it needs to be application/JSON. Okay, now we have our first operation implemented. Now what I find really helpful is always to retest to make sure that this function is working before I start working on all the other functions. So I'm going to restart Node here real quick. So I'm starting Node again. Then I'm going to go back to Postman, and I'm going to send a new read request, and now I expect to see the 2 books in here. And they're there. So we already have 1 operation down, and we have 3 more to go. But read is the easiest operation probably to get going. Okay, I hope everybody has this as a result. If yes, then I'm going to continue with the second operation, which is create book. Now, create book is a bit more, well, I wouldn't say complex, but they're a bit more elaborate because we need to do several things to get it working. So first of all, what we need to make sure, what we need to get is what is the body in this request. So remember, when we send the request to create a book, the method is post and the URL, and that is being checked by Express, right? Because that is how we defined it here. We say it needs to be a post, this needs to be the URL, but there is no check in Express about the body. So we actually need to get the body first, and to make sure that the body has a title and an author in it. Otherwise, we cannot, we do not have the information that we need to create this book. If it has no title and author, then we cannot really create a book in a meaningful way. Now, how do we do that? It turns out it's pretty easy to do this with Express. All you need to do is add a single line at the top of your file, right after app. This line looks like this. So the line, it needs to be after app equals express, and you need the line says app.use express.json. Now this is a bit of magic that express does, and with this line, basically whatever is in the request will be parsed as JSON and then will be available uh, when you type request.body. So if I type request.body in the request handler, then I will be able to see the request. So let's test that real quick. So function create book. Actually, I'm gonna write this on top so that always the latest thing to write is on top. Can I get rid of these guys? Let's get rid of these guys because we have the same information in here to keep this nice and clean. Okay, so I create book, request, and response. And I'm going to show you now that I have the request body in the request object. So if I do console.log request.body, we should see the body as a JSON object. So again, I will restart now. And then I'm going to send a new request, a post request. Now nothing will happen here, but here I should have a log, and yeah, as I expect. So the request.body now gives me the body as a JSON object, and then I can access the different fields of it. For example, I could say title. Let's start it again. Let's send a new request. For example, the title, and this is correct now. This is how you can get the body of the request. So while you're doing your homework, if you get an error, for example, if I now get rid of this line, this will no longer work. So if I send a new request now, see now I get an error. It says cannot read something blah blah of undefined. That is because I need to have this line at the top of my file so that I can use this request.body. Otherwise, request.body is not defined. So always make sure that you use this line at the top. And this is for JSON, and will mostly work with JSON. But if you have some other format in the request body, then you might need to use a different line here to parse that. Express has different kinds of these things for parsing different types of requests. But for us, the most common one that we'll use is JSON. So we can go ahead and use that. Now, the first thing that we need to do, once we have the request in, we need to check if the request has all the data that we need. All right, so we need to make sure that there is a body. So request.body needs to be there. In other words, it should not be undefined. So this should not be undefined. So the body should not be undefined, or there should be also a title, right? That's what we said. The book needs to have a title. And then type of dot author. Yeah. So if any of these three conditions are fulfilled, so if either the body or the title or the author are missing, then this is a bad request. Okay, this is not a good request, and then we need to tell to the user, you send me a bad request. I cannot create a user if you don't send me a title. So we need then to send to the user response dot send invalid request. Right? And also it would help if we set the right status. So what is the status for this? That is 400. 400 is a bad request. And also I now showed you how you can set the status with Express. And I'm also going to add here a return statement, basically because we set the status, we send back the response, and then we are done. We are not going to do anything else here with this function. Okay. Now, if we try to send a request, let's say without the title, I'm going to remove the title for now. And if I try to send this, I get, oh, that's because I did not restart. So always remember to restart. Now let's restart. And now if I send it without the title, I expect a 400. And that's correct. So I get the 400 invalid request. If I put the title back in, then it should no longer complain. But I don't have any logic right now to add this to the book. So we need to add that logic. So the way to do this probably is we're going to say data.push, and then we're going to create a new book. Let's say title. Let's do it like this actually. Let's say let new book is an object where the title is based on what's in the request body, and then the author is also based on what is in the request body. And then I'm going to put in the data that I have, I'm going to add this new book using push. So push is to push an element into array, and data is just an array of books that I have. Okay. Now let's try this again. Stop, start again. And notice I'm doing this a lot of times. So when you're building and you're writing homework, make sure to test every step of the way. Make sure you test it with Postman so that you know that everything is working. Don't wait until you write everything and then you test and then you have no idea where the error you made the error. Let's try this again. Okay, it doesn't seem to be working. I think it actually worked. It's just there is no response coming back. So let's try to read. Okay. So there, we got our book in. But notice it's missing the ID in here, and also there was no response. So when I tried to create a book, it did not come back with a response. It just waiting forever. So that's not good. So we need to change that. To change that behavior. So to generate an ID, there are different ways how you can generate an ID. Probably the most common one is to use something which is called UUID. It's written like this, UUID, which stands for Universally Unique Identifier, something like that. So this is a way to generate IDs for objects, which is basically guaranteed to be unique everywhere in the world. So you don't have to worry that it's not going to be unique. And of course, there is a library for that. And so if I search on npm, let me show you how this looks like. So if I go to npm and search for UID, you can see here UID exact match 28 million downloads. So this is pretty good. And we're just going to run npm install for this. So stop the running server, npm install UID. Okay, to install this package, which will generate unique identifiers for us. Then to use this package, we need to require it, of course. As I'm going to put that in the top here. I forgot here use strict. So this is our UID. And the way to use it basically is to say here const ID is UID. What this does, it gives you back an ID that looks something like this. So some numbers and some letters, it doesn't matter what they are, it's pretty long, but it's basically guaranteed that this will be unique uh, throughout, throughout the whole world basically. The way it's generated is beyond the scope. You can read about it, but it's not that important. So just copy these two lines and throw them in your code. And this is, we use this very often whenever we need to generate a unique identifier. Now, sometimes in some applications, it is possible that some things have a natural identifier that is unique. But many times, it's the case that you need to generate your own identifier. And that's what we are going to do here with this UID library. Okay, so we have generated the ID. Now we need to put it in the book. I'm going to say here ID is ID. And then finally, we need to send back the ID in the response so that the user knows what is the ID of the book that he just created. I'm just going to throw that in here, res.send ID. And let's try this again now, if this works. So I go again to the page to create books. And I'm going to send another request. Okay, now I get a response, which is 200, and I get the ID of the book that was created. So D2 something. Now if I try to read the books again, I should have also the same ID in here, in the array of books. Now if you don't have the same result as I have, then go back to the code, pause the video, and make sure that everything is working up to this example so that you can read books and create books before we go ahead. If you have any problems that you cannot solve, then on the QA session on Sunday, then we can look at them together, or before that or after that. We can look at them together. Finally, what I did not do in the past, and I forgot to set the right status code. So let's correct that and set the status code to 201, which stands for created. Okay, now is the next part, and this is the really fun part. That is the put or the update. So let's make a new function which says update book. Again, a request and a response. Now, update book is quite similar to create book because when you want to update, we also need to send the title and the author. So when I'm updating a book, I again have to send the title and the author. And again, we need to check that the title and the author are really sent in the body of the request. Basically, I need the same code that I have in here to go in the update book. However, I don't want to now copy this code. It's a lot of code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this code in a function that I'm going to use in both places. So let me grab this if here, and I'm going to create a new function. Function is invalid request. And then I'm going to say if body is undefined or da 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 da. If everything is undefined, then the request is not valid. And else, else the request is valid or false. Okay, so I have now a function, and I'm going to use this function here in the create book is invalid request. Now, if the request is invalid, then I'm going to send the status to 400. I'm going to send back invalid request. Now, this part I can copy. Is invalid request, and status is 400, then send back invalid request and return. It's a common way how to deal with having to copy paste code around, is to put that code in a function and that call that function in two different places so that you don't have to copy paste the same code. I'm gonna throw this here at the bottom somewhere so it does not disturb us. It is very easy to forget that you need to validate. Whenever you're testing, usually you will have your requests already set up in the nice way. But keep in mind that in the real world, you will get all kinds of requests. So make sure to validate that what you're getting in the request is what you expect to get. Otherwise, you will get weird errors somewhere in the middle of the request handlers. It's very important to have this kind of check at the beginning of the request handler whenever you expect something in the body. Now what I've done here is with this type of. This is a bit old-fashioned, and nowadays there are more sophisticated ways to define how the request should look like. There is a thing called JSON schema and so forth. But for our course, we are going to use this method to check the request. Okay, I'm diverging a bit. So we have the update book. Okay, we check that the body of the request has title and author. Next, what we need to do is get from the URL this parameter. Now, this parameter in reality will be replaced with the actual ID of the book. All right, for example, here I have update book. This is the host, then I have the path books, and then this value is the ID of the actual book that I'm trying to update. Now, this is how the URL looks like, and I need to get this data somehow in my handler. So here I have declared that this is a parameter, and I've given it a name, which is ID, and in my request handler I can get this parameter from the path using using a special name, which is called, so const ID is request dot params dot ID. So basically every parameter that you have in the URL with this syntax will be stored in an object called parameters, and then based on the name that you have here, which is ID, you can access that parameter. So to make sure that I'm not lying to you and this is working, we can console log that ID to see that it's really working correctly. So let me run this again. Again, I have no handling. I just want to see that this is logged to the console correctly. So let's see. Yeah, and you see here now this ID holds the value that I have sent in the URL, the actual value, and not just .id. Okay. Now what we need to do when we're updating a book, and now we have the ID of the book that we want to update, we need to check to make sure that we actually have that book in our list of books, right? We have a list of books that we have, and we need to make sure that this ID is actually in this list. Otherwise, we cannot do an update. We cannot update a book that we don't have. It's also something that is easy to forget. Again, when you are testing, you need to make sure to test with IDs that do not exist as well as with the IDs that do exist. Now, how can we find easily in an array of books that we have in this array, how can we find a book with the ID that matches this ID? So we can use array functions. And because we know that we are looking for exactly one book and not multiple books, because the ID should be unique, we can use find. So find basically gives us the first object where a condition matches, and we're going to make the condition that the ID of the book matches the ID in the parameter. So book ID should be request.params.id. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this here. So now this should give us the book that we're trying to update. Again, I'm going to console log this just to make sure that that it works. So You see, I write one line and then I try to console log and test to see if everything is working so far. So make sure to do the same when you're doing the homeworks and the projects so that you don't get lost if you write too much code before you test. So book to update is data.find book, where the book ID is what is in the request, in the parameters of the request. So I'm running now. Okay. Now let me read the list of books that I have. Okay, and grab an ID from here. And now I'm going to try to read it. So if I put this ID in here, I will have no response here, but I should have in the console log, I should have that book. That's correct. Now let's try with an ID that is not there. So some random gibberish. Yeah, now it says undefined. So this is working. If I pass an ID with this line of code, I can find that book in my database. Now, because there is a possibility that the book is not there, I need to check for that. So I need to make sure that whatever I'm looking for, I'm able to also find. So let's check for that. Let's check that the book, if the book is undefined, then the ID that the user sent to me is bad. So I could not find this book. So I need to send him back that I could not find the book, which status code is used for when you cannot find things. That's 404. And I will just send a small message that says no such book, for example. Now you can send anything in here. Very important is to send the right status. And I'm gonna say return to stop executing this request handler, because at this point I have set the status, I have set the data, and I have nothing more to do, so I can just return and stop executing at this point. That's why I'm using this return here. And again, we can do a quick test for this. So if I now send again the same book, now I get a 404 not found, no such book. Okay, that's looking really good. So what we have so far, when we try to update the book, we check the request. If the request has a title and an author, otherwise we say 400. Then based on the ID in the URL, we find the book that we're trying to update. If by some chance there is no such book, then we say to the user 404, we couldn't find the book that you're trying to update. If the book is there and we have the data that we want to update, then finally we can update the book that we want to update. So at the very end, what we can do, now we have the book, and all we need to do basically is set the title and the author based on what we got in the request. So the title should be based on request.body.title, and the same should be done for the author. So author should be request.body.author. And finally, we need to send something back to the user so that he knows that the request is finished and everything was fine. So we're just going to send OK. And by default, if we don't set a status, then it's 200. So this should be fine. Okay, let's try this one last time for the updating, and let's see how that works. So I have here my book. Okay, so let's try again from the very beginning. Let's read the books. Okay, we have 2 books in here. Now let's try to create a new book. I'm going to use the same data here. Okay, now I get the ID of the book. Again, I'm going to call read books to make sure the book is actually created. There it is, and ID is the same. So I can copy the ID also from here. Now let's go to update book and copy the same ID over here. Whoa, that's pretty big. I think I copied something by mistake. Let's copy again. Put it in here. Okay, so we put that ID in here, and we put some data in here that we want to change. And now we run this request, and hopefully everything works. It says OK, status 200. That looks really good. Again, we have to double check. So we're going to read again. And there it is. So now the book is actually updated. Okay, so that is the update. We have finished now the update. Now the only thing left is the delete. So if I look at the request handler definition here, I have a request handler for the delete method at this URL, at this path, and that should call the function delete book. So let's write this function. It says delete book, it takes a request and a response, and then inside here, what we need to do. So there is no body when you're trying to delete, so we don't need to check the body. What we do have is, again, we have this ID, right? So we again have to get this ID and check if that ID exists in our database. I'm just going to grab this thing from here and copy paste it in here so that we have the same kind of logic for deleting. I will call this now book to delete. So I'm trying to delete a book, and if it's not there, then I'm going to return undefined. Otherwise, what I want to do is from this list of books, which is called data, I want to remove this object. Now, how I can do that really easily. So somehow I have an object and I have an array of objects and I want to delete that object. So one easy way is to use splice. Splice is a method which basically removes a number of elements from the array, given a starting index, and then how many elements you want to remove. So this should be index of book to delete, index in the array, and then I want to delete one book, right? And then res.send. Okay. Now how to get this index? Basically, we can say data.index of book to delete, basically. This will give us the index of the book that we want to delete. And then from that index onwards, we are going to delete one element from data. Splice is going to change the data in place, so we don't have to reassign or anything. So that should be enough to delete the book from the list. Again, we're going to stop, start again, and I'm going to open it here. And now I'm going to again read all the books. I'm going to create a book. I grab the ID, read the books again to make sure the book is there. And finally, I'm going to delete this book here at the bottom. I'm going to paste this in here. I delete. It says OK. If I go back to read the books, everything is good. So the delete works. Again, I will try now to delete with some gibberish in the URL, and I expect this to say bad request not found 404. So that is the entire example that we have. I hope you're coding together with me and that everything is working. If you have any questions about this, we're going to look at them in the Q&A. So in total, 77 lines. So not a huge app, but already we are achieving quite a lot of things with it. Well, that is all for the example. There is one last part where I'm going to talk briefly about the homework.